Next, we'll be looking into understanding the difference between library and framework. Because any beginner or fresher, whoever are just entering into the software programming world, or maybe they are entering into JavaScript ecosystem, they get to hear this question like, this is library and this is not a framework. So they get to hear this a lot, and that's what the confusion begins, guys. Right? So library versus framework. Understanding this, I mean the fundamentals of this also helps you in write a better code, because see, both of these are connected to your code itself, both library and framework. Somehow, like let's understand how they are connected to each other. But the better understanding of these two will help you write, I mean, at least use the library or use the framework very well, right? So fundamentals for everything should be clear. So basically, you write a piece of code. Okay, so what is library and what is framework? Let me define that first. Library is a reusable piece of logic. Even you can write a library. So let's say you're exposing certain number of functions, like calculate, add add number of days to the date, add number of seconds to the date, add subtract number of seconds from the date. So basically, that date library which you are writing is a collection of utility functions. Like we use it across the program, right? Like maybe at some places you want to subtract the date, some places you want to uh, add the date, add the seconds, add the minutes, whatsoever. Maybe if your application is heavily dependent on date, then instead of writing the code again and again, we write it in the form of library and we use it. So library is a collection of utility functions which can be reused across the program. But framework, what generally people say about framework is it is a collection of libraries operating under certain rules. So, yeah, that is correct to some extent, but I don't want you guys to look the framework in that aspect because it is only 50% right. Framework is a collection of libraries and it definitely operates under the rules which the guys who have developed the framework will put. But what other thing is that in a library you always from your code, so see, you write your code like maybe you're using Angular, let's say Angular framework. So you write a certain piece of code to display a timer or anything. So your code, if it is using a library, then you always call that library. There is no other way. So see, library can never call your code. It doesn't work the other way. But in framework takes control. Framework takes control of your code. This is called as inversion of control. So in library, it is never possible. Nobody or out of the box comes from the library and calls your code so that your code is being executed. So framework has the power. Framework has the power to call your code determined by certain principles. Like you define those principles, you follow those principles. So maybe you want to say that after every second you update my code. Okay, so your code is updating the UI. So you say the framework that I am designing a timer. So this function which updates the UI saying the clock moves from here. So you have written a function to move the stick in this direction. So who is calling this function every 1 second? You define all of these principles and say to the framework, hand over to the framework will take the control from you and it understands, okay, this piece of function should be called by me for every 1 second so that UI gets updated. But in library, you only call the function, you only set timers and everything. Nobody is calling your function. Library never involves in calling your function. So this is the basic difference, guys, because when you're writing a code in a framework, you have to think in this aspect. So how am I giving my control to the framework very well? So if I'm operating in my framework rules very well, it means I'm writing a better piece of code. And you never give any control to the library. So you write a library, you use a library for implementing the better reusable logic. Okay, so this is one major difference which everybody tends to forget. Okay, so if you see, this is a library and your code. So your code is being attached to the library. So you're calling the library, you're using the library functions, whatever are needed. But if you see the broader perspective, in your framework has entire control of your code. So maybe this all these three things are the libraries which you are using inside, but your framework has taken over the entire control of your code, and that will be coming into picture whenever it is needed. Like in it is this is what we call as inversion of control. So framework can take control on your code at any time. So now I am saying JavaScript or React.js is a library and frame Angular is a framework. Okay, so framework has a collection of libraries. So the same thing, but just inversion of control can be happened only in framework. Okay.